Well, howdy YouTube family. It is Bolt CRNA coming to you again with another day's topic. Today we're going to talk about what you should know, the basics of anesthesia, the 101 of anesthesia that you should know before you go to CRNA school. How should you be prepared academically and knowledge-wise for CRNA school to do the best that you can possibly do when you start the program? Let's get into it. The first and easiest thing that you can do is go through the drips and the pharmacology of the meds that you're giving already in the ICU. Your propofol infusions, Versed, your neosynephrine, your Levophed, your dopamine, epinephrine, all of these kind of core drugs that you infuse all the time in the unit and you give all the time and you maybe do during codes and stuff. Make sure you understand the in-depth ways that they're working, the receptors they're working on, you know, the bioavailability of them, how long they last in the system, just interactions with other drugs, serious adverse responses that may happen with certain patients on these kind of situations. Understand those basics of the pharmacology of what you're doing with those drugs, because those are likely, if they're going to ask you pharmacology questions, it's probably going to be about drugs that you've already given the unit. They're not going to ask you, I highly doubt they're going to ask you about like succinylcholine or something that's like a specific anesthesia drug that you really never give in the ICU as an RN, because they don't expect you to be an SRNA already. They know that they're going to have to teach you all this stuff about anesthesia. They don't expect you to already be an anesthesia student who knows these things. They expect you to be a really good ICU nurse. They expect you to be a little above average ICU nurse who has gone through and researched and knows more things about what they're doing and the drugs they're giving and the interventions they're giving on the unit. Knows a little bit more about them than the typical ICU nurse because you took the initiative to study and learn, because that's what they want. They want the top of the top ICU nurses, not the basic level, can basically do their clinical practice and that's it, ICU nurses. Another thing that you should do before you start anesthesia school is brush up on how to run a code, your ACLS and PALS and your BLS. Not only is it good for your clinical practice as an SRNA, but it's also good just to have an idea of the steps and the kind of the processes and a little bit of the pathophys of what's going on during a code and cardiac and respiratory things and securing an advanced airway and all that kind of stuff. That kind of gives you a little bit of a leg up. And I have heard of some CRNA programs asking you to like run like a code type situation, and they watch you run a code situation because they assume as an ICU nurse you know how to run a code and you've done it many a times, so they want to see what you do. If you're fumbling around, you don't seem to know what you're doing, and the patient, you know, doesn't survive or something like that because of great negligence, that doesn't look good on an interview if they're interviewing you and they ask you to run like a code simulation. So yeah, know what's going on in the code, know how you run it, and be able to just do it quickly. Another thing that I have seen people do when they go in for interviews, they preparing to become an SRNA, they kind of like they research out certain drugs or certain meds like neostigmine and things like that you don't give as an ICU nurse, and they go into an interview or talking to the program and they try and impress them by showing them like, oh, I know this stuff, and oh, I learned this stuff, or I don't. Well, the problem is you probably don't know it like you think you do know it. You probably just know little elements of it, and there is a lot about anesthesia that has to really be taught to you. You can't just read an anesthesia textbook as an RN and be like, oh, I figured out anesthesia now. I understand what they're talking about. I understand how this drug is used and the clinical scenarios that I would do it for and why I wouldn't do it and stuff. All that stuff has to be not only clinically taught to you in person, but it also has to be academically taught to you and broke down and made sense of. You're really not going to make much sense of it just reading it on your own. So the students who do try and read that stuff and figure out, you know, in-depth anesthesia meds and try and maybe go in for the interview and throw in these, you know, complex meds or try and impress them, they're probably going to ask you specific difficult questions that an anesthesia provider would know about that drug, and you're not going to know the answers to them, and they're going to make you look silly. And then you've made yourself look bad because you've shown them that you've tried to show out and impress them when you actually didn't know what you're talking about. So that's really bad. You don't want to go in trying to impress somebody with false information that you've read in a book that you don't really understand. So when people ask me, how should I prepare for CRNA school or whatever, don't prepare for CRNA school by trying and reading anesthesia textbooks and trying to understand anesthesia concepts before you even get there. That stuff's going to have to be taught to you. So don't get ahead of yourself with that information. Now, what you can do when you're trying to read ahead is read books like Watchful Care. That teaches you the history of CRNAs. It teaches you who our founding fathers and mothers of anesthesia were, who the original CRNAs and nurse anesthetists were way back into the Civil War time and things like that, when anesthesia and nurse anesthetists first began, and why they began, and what they first did in anesthesia, the first drugs that they kind of used, and how they used to keep logs of all their patients and how they would respond to stuff, because back then it was completely undocumented. Like there wasn't a lot of research about anesthesia, so it was very much trial and error and monitoring patients and just seeing responses and hoping things went well. And so our founding nurse anesthetists were really exemplary, because they paved the way for anesthesia and what it is today. So that is important before you start CRNA school, is understanding where we came from, who our founding nurse anesthetists were and what they did and the impact they made on healthcare and anesthesia, and who CRNAs are today, and the political battles, the legislative battles, and the educational changes that have happened from 150 years ago until today, when we all have doctorates to start practicing, and how much stuff has changed and how much anesthesia has changed. That you can brush up on, and that is really important before you start CRNA school. Another thing that you can do is go to the AANA website. That's AANA, the American Association of Nurse Anesthetists. That's the national organization, that's our professional organization that governs over CRNAs in America. Go to their website. They have tons of great information and details and stuff about how their governance is ran, and all that stuff is you're gonna be inducted into the AANA as soon as you become an SRNA. And so once you become a member and a student member, you're gonna be involved, and you're gonna go to conferences and different things like that involve the AANA. So get involved, understand what the AANA is, what some recent legislative battles they've dealt with, what's going on, what's hot topics in anesthesia, whether it be opioid-free anesthesia or a VA's decision to leave CRNAs out of full practice authority for the APRNs, or whatever is going on with the world of anesthesia. Research up on it a little bit, understand what you're stepping into, because that's your future career. You're about to step into the career of being a CRNA, and there is a whole big realm that surrounds that's a lot larger than just clinical practice of anesthesia. So be aware of that and kind of go into CRNA school already understanding the role that you're going to be playing, and all the different people who have come for the last century and a half before you, who have paved the way to create you being able to do what you're doing right then in that moment as a new student. And the last thing that I recommend, the Basics Anesthesia 101 that I would say you should do before you start the program, is go on vacation. Go enjoy yourself. Go have fun. Enjoy the last little bit of time. Read Watchful Care, and know your pharmacology with your anesthesia or with your ICU meds and stuff. But don't go crazy in depth trying to read Guyton and Hall's anatomy and physiology textbooks and stuff, and all the different stuff you're about to jump into in anesthesia school. People ask me all the time, should I read this book or prepare doing this? Don't, because you're going to have to do that for 3 years. It's really not going to help you very much trying to study it in advance, because most of it you're not really going to understand. You're going to be overwhelmed by a lot of it, and you may get there and find out the teachers explain it to you in a very different way than what the book does. They might take some concepts from the book and then teach it a very different way, so it may not help you much to read a whole bunch of the textbook. And you may not even retain much of the textbook after you read it. So there's a whole lot of different reasons why it's just not a good idea. You don't bring the stress down on yourself before you even start the program. Go to Hawaii. Go have some fun. Work some overtime shifts and save up some money, because for 3 years you really don't need to be focusing on working. You need to be focusing on school. So work extra shifts. Go on vacation. Enjoy your life. Spend time with your family. Play video games. Read a book for fun, because trust me, you will not touch a single text. You won't touch a single book that's fun for 3 years. You won't want to, even I'm out of school now and I'm almost got PTSD. Like I don't even want to open a book. Like I don't want to look at a book. I'll listen to a podcast. That's about as close as I'll get to educational anything at this point, because I'm still kind of burnt out months later from just this 3-year journey of so much work constantly all the time. So yeah, just enjoy your time. Enjoy the ability of having a paycheck come in and being able to say, you know what, we're going to the movies tonight, and and then we're going to go out to eat after, and you know what, we're going to go to the beach this weekend, or whatever you want to do. Be able to do those things, enjoy them, really take pictures. I tell people, take pictures of yourself doing those things and put those pictures on your wall over your study, where your desk is going to be when you're in school and studying. Put them up there, because that is Anesthesia 101. That is your lifeline and your survival for getting through CRNA school, is being able to say, I had fun at one point in my life, this is worth it, I'm willing to sacrifice all that I'm sacrificing to do this. I will have fun again. I will go to the beach again one day. It will happen for me. And you'll just look at those pictures and remember, it will happen for you again one day. So that is my basic Anesthesia 101 tips for what you should do to prepare for CRNA school. Well, all right, guys, that is it. That is my tips. I hope you liked them. If you didn't, I'm sorry. They're all just real tips. Sometimes they stink. Sometimes the real answers do stink. But I try and keep it real with you guys. If you have any questions about them, hit me up in the comments below. If you have any things that you recommend students doing before they start CRNA school, say that down below too. It's a whole mind share of tips and tricks around here. I want to hear all of your thoughts and ideas too. I'm not the only one who's got good ideas around here. Some of you guys have the best ideas I've heard, and teach me sometimes when you message me online and stuff. So, love hearing from you guys. Of course, you can, like, subscribe, share, follow me over on Instagram. It's Bolt CRNA over there, and that's Bolt out.